Some storms don't roar, they arrive in silence. Arnold Schwarzenegger hadn't heard from his niece in months. She was strong, quiet, the kind who never asked for help. But one night, in a dusty Texas town, a single message lit up his phone. Just 3 words, "I need you." And that was enough. Enough to awaken the part of him he thought he'd left behind, the part forged not in Hollywood lights, but in the frozen kitchens of Austria, where discipline was louder than fear. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from, and if this story moves you, don't forget to subscribe. They called it Lake View, but the only thing you could really see was dust. The sun hovered low over the flat streets of Texas, painting the town in a dry, golden haze. A faded silver sedan pulled into a cracked driveway beside a 1-story house that hadn't seen fresh paint in a decade. Inside, behind the passenger window, a girl sat still. Her name was Mia Schwarzenegger, 17, tall, composed, and quiet in a way that made people uncomfortable. Her Aunt Yuki turned off the ignition and glanced sideways. "We're here," she said softly. Mia nodded once. She stepped out slowly, her sneakers landing soundlessly on the warm concrete. The air smelled like dry grass and rust. Across the street, a curtain twitched, a neighbor watching. That didn't surprise her. People always watched. The house had belonged to Yuki's late husband's family, untouched for years. Arnold, Mia's uncle, her father's younger brother, had paid for its upkeep, quietly, consistently, just like everything else he did for them after the accident. It was Arnold who brought Mia and her mother to California when the hospital bills came. Arnold who called every Christmas, even when Mia didn't answer. Arnold who once told her, "In a world full of noise, silence is a strength." Inside, the house smelled like old wood and lemon cleaner. Not abandoned, just paused. On one wall hung a black and white photograph. Arnold at 25, standing beside a younger Maynard. Both boys shirtless, chiseled, arms crossed, faces unreadable. Mia stood before it for a long moment. Then she turned and walked down the narrow hallway to what would now be her room. That night she unpacked without a word. T-shirts, books, a framed photo of her mother, and a thin leather notebook worn at the edges. On the inside cover, scrawled in clean German cursive, "Disziplin ist Freiheit." Discipline is freedom. The next morning, Lakeview High School rose before her like a brick fortress. Wide lawns, narrow minds, or so the rumors went. She wore the standard uniform, navy skirt, white blouse, hair pulled into a clean braid. Her steps were light but purposeful. Inside, the noise hit first, lockers slamming, shoes squeaking, laughter sharp like glass, conversations lowered as she walked by. Her name wasn't known yet, but her presence said enough. At her locker, she focused on the numbers. Click, click, click. She didn't look up, even when a voice behind her muttered, "Who brings a bodybuilder niece to high school?" She placed her books in slowly, precisely. In first period, the teacher read from a roster. When he got to her name, he paused. "Schwarzenegger," he said, glancing up. A few chuckles. One student whispered, "Like the Terminator." She just nodded. Second period, chemistry. The boy next to her leaned in, grinning. "What's it like having a robot uncle?" No reply. In gym, someone whispered, "Don't make her mad, she might throw a car." Another kid called out, "Bet she lifts her backpack with her teeth." More laughter. She changed in the corner of the locker room, back turned, expression blank. At lunch, she found a spot under a tree at the edge of the courtyard. Out came a small container, boiled eggs, brown rice, sliced cucumber. She ate without looking around. From 2 tables over, a blonde girl in a cheer jacket wrinkled her nose. "What even is that?" someone said. "Looks like prison food." Another voice added, "Makes sense, her uncle's basically a tank." By the end of the week, she hadn't raised her voice once, but her silence made her visible. It unsettled people. A few kids tested her, tried to bump into her in the halls, threw a paper airplane that landed on her desk with "Metalhead" scrawled across the wing. Mia folded it, placed it neatly in the trash, never looked back. That Friday afternoon, she walked alone to her locker. The metal door was marked in thick red letters, "Go back to Cyberland." Below it, a crude drawing, thick arms, slanted eyes, a barbell through the head. She stood still. A group of students watched from down the hall. One boy whispered, "Guess even Terminators can be broken." Laughter followed. Mia opened the locker, placed her books inside, and closed it quietly. She walked away without a word, shoes clicking softly against the tile. That night, she sat at the kitchen table. Yuki brought her tea. On the television, a documentary played old footage of Arnold at Venice Beach, lifting weights, surrounded by cameras, young, intense, focused. He didn't start out strong, Yuki said, almost to herself. He just never stopped. Mia sipped her tea slowly. Then she reached for her notebook and opened to a blank page. With calm, even strokes, she wrote, "Don't become noise, become presence." And outside, in the quiet Texas night, the wind picked up just slightly. As if something had shifted. Monday morning came like a quiet dare. The sky over Lake View was pale and stiff, like it hadn't stretched in years. Mia walked to school alone, shoes steady against the pavement. She said nothing. Made no eye contact, but every movement was precise, measured. Students drifted past her in clumps, conversations curling around her like smoke. Some glanced, others stared. It didn't take long for the whispers to catch. By third period, her name had already spread. Not for something she said, just for being who she was. In gym, the coach barked instructions for relay drills. Mia waited her turn, hands behind her back. Travis Brower, tall and loud with a quarterback's build, stood on the next lane over. Son of Sheriff Brower, his voice carried without effort. "Hey Terminator," he called, "try not to crush the baton." The boys around him laughed on cue. Mia didn't react. She stepped into place, her braids still, eyes forward. The whistle blew. She ran, smooth, controlled. When it came time to pass the baton, Travis jogged across the lane. Shoulder checked her just hard enough to throw her off balance. Mia hit the ground, palms scraped, knees burning. The coach turned away, didn't say a word. As she stood, Travis smirked. "Oops," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "Didn't see you there, Robo-Girl." That lunch, her spot under the tree was already taken. A group of students had claimed it, loud, sprawling, claiming space with noise. Mia sat at a bench near the dumpsters, eating in silence. Her bento was simple, rice, egg, a few vegetables, the kind of meal that spoke more of ritual than convenience. A boy passing by wrinkled his nose. "What's that smell?" he said. Another replied, "Engine oil and chopsticks." Laughter erupted. Mia didn't look up. Later that week, someone stuck a fake fitness magazine page on her locker. It read, "Muscle Mutant of the Month." Her face had been printed, cut, and pasted onto a comic book bodybuilder's frame. The paper was taped crooked, jagged. She pulled it off slowly, folded it clean, dropped it into the trash. Friday, the air was heavier, the kind of heat that clung behind your neck. As Mia turned a hallway corner, she nearly ran into a wall of boys, Travis and his circle, flanked by cheap cologne and swagger. He stepped into her path. "You the new cyber Barbie?" he asked, his voice smooth with mockery. Mia paused, looked him in the eye. "Excuse me," she said, even. He didn't move. "I asked you a question. You one of those deepfake kids or something?" Behind him, someone chuckled. Another added, "Nah, she's real, uncle's like. Some kind of alien lifter or something." Travis smirked wider. "So, is he really your uncle, Mr. I'll be back?" Mia's face didn't flinch. "He's family," she said. "Oh, so what's the plan? Break our backs with dumbbells if we say the wrong thing?" "No," she said. "He taught me restraint. You should try it." The hallway went quieter than usual. Travis's grin faltered just a hair. "That's cute," he said. "You talk like you're in a movie. Too bad this is real life." She stepped to the side, calm. "Exactly." After school, Mia walked home the long way. The sky hung low, clouds yawning overhead. As she passed the gas station, someone honked. A pickup truck slowed beside her. Travis again. "Hey, Cyborg," he shouted through the open window. "Need a ride to the future?" She didn't respond. He revved the engine, tossed an empty soda can toward her feet. It landed, rolled, then stopped. At home, Yuki was out late at the clinic. Mia sat on the back porch alone. The mat lay untouched in the corner. She stared at it, her breath slow, measured. Her fingers curled slightly, not from anger, from pressure. Like something inside her was waiting for permission. That night, she opened her notebook again. Beneath the line she'd written days ago, she added, "Pressure is quiet until it's not." The next morning, she returned to her locker and found it defaced. Red marker across the metal. Go back to the lab. Underneath, a sketch, a dumbbell over her head, her eyes crossed out. She stood still. Students passed, some slowed. One boy murmured, "Guess Schwarzenegger genes don't come with a sense of humor." Mia exhaled through her nose, opened the locker, stored her books, closed it. No words, no rage, just movement. That night she sat with Yuki as the TV played an old Arnold film in the background. A young Arnold crushed weights without a grunt, expression calm, unshakable. "He never yelled," Mia said. "No," Yuki replied. "He never had to." Mia watched the screen, her voice barely above a breath. "But what if they don't stop?" Yuki didn't look away. "Then you show them what power sounds like when it doesn't speak." Outside, the wind pressed gently against the windows. But inside Mia, something pressed harder, and it was getting ready to move. The weekend came without relief. The heat lingered like judgment. At night, the ceiling fan hummed above Mia's bed, casting slow-moving shadows across her wall. She lay still, eyes open, breath shallow, not from fear, from discipline. Each inhale counted, each exhale measured. That was something she remembered well. Years ago, on a cold morning in California, her uncle had taken her out to the backyard before sunrise. She was 9, shivering, confused. Arnold had crouched beside her, his massive frame quiet, grounded. "You can't control what comes at you," he said, "but you can control how you breathe. The breath controls everything." Now the air in her room felt stale. Her body buzzed from the tension she had refused to release. She reached under her bed and pulled out a small black pouch. Inside was a thin jump rope, its handles worn smooth. She stood barefoot and stepped into the backyard. The night air bit at her arms, but she didn't flinch. The rope slapped against the concrete in rhythm. 1, 2, 3. Her breath timed with the motion, not fast, not angry, just steady. Controlled. After 3 sets, she stopped. Her heart beat hard but calm. The next morning she rose before the sun, no alarm, no hesitation. She rolled out the old exercise mat from storage, placed it carefully on the porch, and stood at its center. She began with slow stretches, then moved into bodyweight flows, push-ups, squats, planks held until her arms trembled, each movement rooted in silence, not punishment, presence. Later that day, she returned to school. The hallways buzzed the same way they always had. But Mia noticed things more clearly now. The looks, the muttered comments, a pair of girls near the lockers whispering and laughing, one mimicking a flexed bicep. She walked past them without blinking. In chemistry class, she found a fortune cookie on her desk, not from any restaurant, homemade. Inside a strip of paper, it read, "Your uncle lifts weights, you carry shame." No name, no laugh track, just silence. She folded the note and dropped it into the trash without a glance. Lunch was worse. Her usual spot was left empty, but the ground was sprinkled with protein bar wrappers and raw eggs cracked open, yolks glistening like accusations. She sat anyway, unwrapped her lunch with the same care she always had. A small leaf of nori stuck to the box. She brushed it off gently. A boy walked past and muttered, "You even chew like a machine." Another added, "Might malfunction if she hears a joke." The table nearby chuckled. Mia finished her lunch, closed the lid, stood, walked away, but something had shifted, not in them, in her. That evening she stood once again on the mat, barefoot. No music, no noise, just the breath. She began to move, not fast, not dramatic, just a sequence she had learned when she was 10, controlled body rotations, low squats, shoulder engagement. She held each position until the muscle burned, then transitioned. Her eyes focused ahead, not on anything in particular, but as if meeting something coming toward her. When Yuki came home, she found Mia wiping down the mat with a damp cloth. "I thought you left that behind," Yuki said. Mia didn't look up. "I thought I did too." Yuki placed her bag down, sat on the steps. "It's not about fighting," she said. "I know," Mia replied. "It's about remembering who I am when no one else does." That night, she didn't eat dinner in the kitchen. She sat on her bedroom floor, back against the wall, sipping warm water. Across from her, the old photo of Arnold and Maynard rested against a stack of books. The caption in German beneath it read, "You are stronger than silence." Mia reached for her phone, opened the contacts list, scrolled, paused on one name she hadn't tapped in over a year. Her thumb hovered, her breath held, then she tapped. The line rang, once, twice. Then a deep, unmistakable voice answered, Mia. Her breath caught, she closed her eyes. I need you. There was a pause, not hesitation. Wait, I'm already on my way. The line went silent, but something in Mia's chest unlocked. Outside, the wind stirred again. This time it didn't pass. Arnold arrived before dawn. No cameras, no handlers, just a black rental car rolling through the silent streets of Lakeview, headlights dim, windows tinted. He stepped out wearing a charcoal hoodie, dark jeans and sneakers that barely made a sound against the cracked driveway. At nearly 78, he moved like someone who had spent his entire life in motion and knew exactly how to conserve it. The neighborhood watched through half-closed blinds, but no one stepped outside. They didn't need to. The silhouette was enough. Mia was already awake. In the backyard, she flowed through movements barefoot on the mat. Her braids swung with each turn, her form clean and deliberate. She didn't stop when she sensed him at the edge of the porch. She finished the last motion, exhaled and turned. Their eyes met across the quiet space. He didn't speak, neither did she. Finally, Arnold stepped forward, his voice low, grounded. You remembered the breath. Mia nodded. You said it controls the pace of the fight. I said it controls everything. She lowered her eyes slightly. A quiet bow, not of submission, but of recognition. Later that morning, they sat on the back porch sipping green tea. No music. No distractions, just the sound of birds and the slow rustle of dry wind. I didn't call you to fight my battles, she said after a long silence. Arnold nodded. I know, you called me before you reacted. That means you're still in control. They don't care who I am, Mia said, only that I don't belong. The world doesn't hand you belonging, Arnold said. You build it, with presence, not noise. She looked at him. Am I ready? He didn't smile, just studied her. Are you willing to train for real? Yes. From that day, the backyard became more than routine. It became war prep in silence. Arnold didn't teach her how to lift more. He taught her how to waste less. No unnecessary movements. No tension without direction. Each morning before school, each evening after dinner, they trained. Grip strength, ground control, redirection of weight, clarity of breath under pressure. Arnold brought tools, a resistance rope, weighted bands, a wooden dowel he used to guide her balance. He didn't correct with words, just with pressure, with pause. Mia's shoulders hardened. Her steps grew quieter, not light-controlled. In the mirror, her eyes no longer drifted with doubt. They held steady, ready. By the end of the week, the school felt different, not louder, just heavier. Whispers still followed her, but they sounded uncertain now. Like people couldn't decide if she was weird or dangerous. Then came Friday. It started in the lunch courtyard. Mia sat under the old tree again, alone, unpacking her food like always. A container of rice, grilled chicken, and steamed greens. Simple, clean. Travis walked toward her slow, hands in his pockets. He wasn't laughing, just smirking. Behind him, a few boys hovered but didn't follow too close. They had started to understand something was shifting. Travis leaned over the table, inches from her. Still haven't thanked me, he said. Mia looked up. Calm, for what? For making you famous. He grinned. You're basically a celebrity now. Everyone's watching you. Might as well give them a show. Without warning, he grabbed her lunch tray and flipped it. Rice, chicken, soy sauce splattered across her skirt, her blazer, her face. Gasps echoed. Phones rose. No one moved. Mia stood slowly, her breathing steady. She looked down at the mess, then back up at him. After school, stadium parking lot, she said. Her voice was even, unshaken. Travis blinked. What? If you win, I'll transfer, disappear. But if I win, you leave me alone. And you apologize publicly. He looked around, too many eyes. He couldn't say no, not here. You're on, he said. Just don't cry when it's over. She walked away, soy sauce dripping down her blazer. But her shoulders never slumped. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the bleachers, Mia stood in the empty lot behind the school. Black hoodie, black sneakers, hair braided tight. Arnold leaned on the fence, arms crossed, silent. Travis arrived with two friends, phones already recording. A few teachers lingered nearby, pretending not to watch. Mia stretched. Nothing showy, just precise, centered. Travis cracked his knuckles. Let's get this over with. He charged first. Fast, reckless, she stepped aside, let him pass, let him stumble. He turned, swung hard. She ducked, slipped behind, swept his leg. He hit the ground, gasps. He jumped up red-faced, charged again, this time more aggressive. He grabbed her arm. She twisted, redirected, and flipped him over her hip. He landed flat. Mia knelt beside him, voice low. This ends here, or next time you don't get up. Then she stood, walked away. Arnold nodded once. She hadn't just won, she had taken back her name. The video hit the school group chats before the sun had even set. No filters, no edits, just grainy footage of Travis Brower getting flipped like a sack of laundry on the stadium asphalt. Twice, Mia's movements were precise, controlled. She didn't gloat, didn't speak, just walked away while the camera kept rolling. That silence hit harder than any punch. By midnight, it had spread across the town. Parents whispered. Students rewatched. Local gossip boards lit up. But by morning, the tone had already shifted. The narrative was moving, not by chance, by design. Travis showed up to school the next day with a sling around his arm and a faint bruise under one eye. He didn't walk the halls alone. His father, Sheriff Brower, escorted him into the main office. The look on his face wasn't worry, it was strategy. That afternoon, the school board called an emergency meeting. No students allowed. No teachers invited, just officials, lawyers, and the sheriff in full uniform speaking calmly into microphones. My son was attacked, he said, voice steady. This was not a playground scuffle. This was a premeditated ambush, carried out by a student with a documented training history, trained by a man known for violent films and physical intimidation. He didn't say Mia's name. He didn't have to. That evening, Arnold watched the news from the living room couch, his arms folded, jaw set. Mia sat beside him, still in her hoodie, face unreadable. They're flipping it, she said quietly, turning me into the threat. Arnold didn't blink. You already are, he said, because you didn't break. The next morning, Mia was called to the principal's office. Mr. Dunley sat stiffly behind his desk, his hands folded too tightly. Mia, he began, you're a talented student, but here, when there's a conflict, we ask students to speak to an adult. We don't encourage displays of force. I didn't start anything, Mia said. He dumped food on me. I challenged him to a clean match. I defended myself. You embarrassed the sheriff's son, Dunley said, and in front of half the school. He embarrassed himself. That ended it. 3-day suspension, pending further review. Arnold accompanied her to the district hearing on Friday. The room was packed. Board members, reporters, parents. Sheriff Brower sat near the front, legs crossed, his lawyer speaking for him. They played the video. Paused it at just the right frames. Mia flipping Travis, Travis falling hard. They spliced in clips from old martial arts tournaments, old footage of Arnold from the 80s, flexing on stage, delivering knockout scenes in action films. None of it was current, none of it was context, but it didn't matter. It was all part of the story they wanted to tell. This is not a regular student, the lawyer said. This is a weapon trained. And she used that training to dominate and humiliate another student. This isn't just conflict, it's danger. Then it was Arnold's turn. He didn't use notes, didn't raise his voice, just stood, hands at his sides. My niece was trained to stop, he said. Not to hurt, not to escalate, to stop. He looked at each board member directly. She warned him, she gave him space. She ended it when it was over. That is not aggression, that is discipline. That is control, and it's more than your golden boy ever showed. A murmur rippled through the room. One board member looked away. Another scribbled something quickly. The board didn't vote, not that day. No resolution, just delay. But outside the meeting, the backlash had already begun. Online, anonymous accounts flooded social media. Edited clips showed only the moments Mia struck. Comments called her dangerous. Hashtags surfaced. Lakeview threat, muscle girl mayhem. Some accused her of being a foreign agent. Others called her a roided-out freak. Photos of Arnold from his bodybuilding days were posted beside Mia's student ID, captioned, like uncle, like threat. Yuki began receiving anonymous voicemails at the clinic. Send your niece back before someone else does. We don't need your kind here. One morning, a brick was thrown through their living room window, wrapped in a Confederate flag. Mia didn't flinch. She swept up the glass, picked up the brick, placed it in a towel, disposed of it without a word. That evening she returned to the mat, but this time she didn't train alone. Arnold stood across from her, no commands. Just mirrored movement. They moved in silence, breathing in sync, each motion grounded, deliberate, not aggression, not defense, just clarity. After the final stretch, Mia looked up. "They're not done," she said. "No," Arnold replied. "But neither are you." She nodded, because the fight had never been about fists. It had always been about truth. And truth, when disciplined, doesn't need to shout to be heard. Mia didn't speak much during her suspension. But she didn't sit still either. On Monday, she walked across town to the Lakeview Community Center, a faded brick building tucked between a used tire lot and a shuttered diner. Inside, she found the bulletin board near the front desk, pinned with lost dog flyers and babysitting ads. She taped up a new sign, handwritten, simple block letters, free self-defense class, girls only, ages 12 and up. Instructor Mia Schwarzenegger. The receptionist didn't ask questions, just nodded. The next day, 2 girls showed up, nervous, unsure. By Friday, 7 stood barefoot on the dusty mats, eyes wide, waiting. Mia said little. She demonstrated how to stand, how to fall, how to breathe. She didn't talk about strength. She talked about stillness. "Your body isn't a weapon," she told them. "It's a boundary. You don't use it to hit. You use it to stay." News traveled faster than she expected. A local reporter showed up during the 3rd class, camera crew in tow. He asked for a quote. Mia hesitated, then agreed. "What do you say to people who think you're violent?" he asked. She looked directly into the camera. "He made a choice, I made mine, but I've moved on." The clip aired on the evening news. The town split clean down the middle. Supportive messages came in, so did hate. Comments flooded social media. Some praised her, others mocked her. She didn't respond. She kept teaching. That Saturday night, she stayed late at the center to mop the mats. As she stepped outside, the street was quiet. The sky stretched wide and starless. She turned the corner, heading home, when a pickup truck swerved and screeched to a halt beside her. The door swung open. Sheriff Brower stepped out, alone, shirt untucked, bottle in hand. "You think this is over?" he slurred. "You think you can humiliate my boy and walk away?" Mia didn't move. "Go home, Sheriff," she said. He took a step forward. "You don't belong here. You think you can plant your roots in my town." Another step, closer, his eyes glassy, his body swaying. "You think we won't make this right?" He lunged. Mia moved like breath. No swing, no punch, just one twist, one redirection. She caught his wrist, turned his weight, lowered him to the ground. No sound, no struggle. Just control. Headlights washed over them. A cruiser pulled in fast. 2 officers stepped out. "Sheriff Brower," one said carefully, "you're under arrest. Assault while intoxicated." "She attacked me," the sheriff barked, still on the pavement. But the dash cam had seen it all. So had the officers. Mia stepped back, hands low, breathing calm. Arnold arrived 10 minutes later. He didn't ask what happened. Just walked over, placed a hand on her shoulder, and stood there with her until the sirens faded. By sunrise, the video had gone viral. Again, sheriff arrested after assault on student. Niece of Arnold Schwarzenegger shows restraint during attack. That Monday, the school board reversed Mia's suspension. The principal called her into his office, offered a formal apology. Staff meetings were scheduled. Policy reviews were ordered. Mia didn't return to the cafeteria. She returned to the mat. The next class had over 20 students. A few were parents. One girl from school sat near the back. She used to laugh with the others. Now she watched in silence. Mia led them through breathing drills. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't talk about revenge, only about presence. "When the world pushes," she said, "don't push back, move around it, but don't let it through." Arnold watched from the back, arms crossed. He didn't interrupt. She didn't need him to, because Mia wasn't training anymore. She was building. Mia stepped back onto campus under gray morning sky. The wind moved low through the trees, as if whispering something only the quiet could hear. She wore the same uniform, same shoes, same calm expression. But the silence that followed her now wasn't mockery, it was something else. Recognition. Some students nodded slightly as she passed. A few stepped aside without being asked. Others said nothing but didn't look away. The space around her had changed. Travis Brower never returned to school. Rumors said his family packed up and left town quietly. The house sold within a week. No one confirmed it. No one really needed to. That afternoon, the principal called Mia into his office. His voice had lost its edge. His hands didn't fold so tightly anymore. "We've decided," he said carefully, "to implement new school-wide policies, bullying, racial harassment, staff training, and we're considering a new student-led elective, self-defense, rooted in discipline, if you're willing." Mia looked at him steadily, then nodded. "I am." Word spread quickly. StillPoint, the name she gave her class at the community center, was now official. Students signed up within days. Some who once avoided her now asked for guidance. Girls who used to sit hunched in corners now stood straighter on the mats. Boys who once laughed now listened. Teachers watched from the sides, silent but present. Mia led every class. She didn't perform, she didn't preach. She demonstrated, corrected stances, taught breathing. One day during cool-down she said, "How you stand matters, how you breathe matters more." Arnold still came by sometimes, just to watch, arms crossed in the back. Occasionally he stepped in to adjust a shoulder, shift a foot, guide a grip, but he rarely spoke. This wasn't his place anymore, it was hers. After one session he waited by the door. When the last student left, he walked over. "You don't need me here now," he said. Mia looked up. "I never needed you to fight for me." A faint smile touched the edge of his face. "No, you needed me to remind you who you are." "You did." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "When you name your next dojo," he said, "call me." She nodded. They stood in silence. Then she hugged him, not like a child clinging to a protector, but like a student honoring her teacher. "I love you, Uncle." "I know." The next morning he was gone. No goodbye post, no fanfare, just a quiet departure the way he always came. A week later, Lakeview High held its annual town awards ceremony. For the first time, it was hosted in the school gym, now renamed the Mia Schwarzenegger Center for Peace and Discipline. A bronze plaque had been mounted near the entrance. It showed her mid-motion, frozen in a redirecting stance. Calm face. Focused hands. During the ceremony, the mayor stepped up to the podium. "We're not here tonight to celebrate violence," he said. "We're here to honor the refusal to return it." Mia Schwarzenegger reminded us all that power isn't just physical. It's moral, it's quiet, and when necessary, it moves. Applause rose slowly, then built. A standing ovation. Parents, teachers, students, even some who had once mocked her. When Mia's name was called, she stepped onto the stage. No paper in hand, no script. Her voice was steady. "When I first came to Lakeview, I was told silence meant weakness, that being quiet made you a target. But I've learned that silence isn't submission. Silence is space, space to breathe, to prepare, to know when to move." She paused. "They tried to make me small, but I come from a place that teaches something else. That strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits, sometimes it stands still." She looked out across the crowd. Some faces she knew, some she had taught. "I didn't fight for revenge. I stood up because no one else would. Now I teach others to do the same. Not with fists, but with purpose." The room stayed quiet a moment longer after she finished. Then applause returned. Stronger, sharper, not noise. Echo. That night, as she locked up the community center, she stepped out into the cool October air. The street was empty. Leaves blew across the sidewalk. She turned the corner and stopped. A freshman girl stood under a flickering light, holding a notebook. "Miss Schwarzenegger," the girl said, nervous, shifting weight between feet. "I just wanted to say thank you. What you said at the assembly, it helped me. I used to think silence meant I was weak, but now." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Mia smiled gently. "Silence is strength if you choose it." The girl nodded and walked away. Mia stood there for a moment longer, then continued on, because standing still doesn't mean staying in place. It means being ready. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.